"Sir, I can help her walk," said the homeless boy. The father froze. A 10-year-old boy with duct-taped shoes and no home claims he can help a paralyzed girl walk again. And he's right. With nothing but his late mother's teachings and a heart full of purpose, Micah transforms a quiet park into a place of healing and hope. But who is this mysterious boy? And how does he change dozens of lives without asking for a single thing in return? This is not just a story. It's a miracle stitched with sweat, courage, and quiet love. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will move your soul. It was the kind of cold that stung your cheeks and made every breath curl in the air like smoke. The morning mist hung low over Graceview Children's Rehab Center, softening the sharp edges of its pale concrete walls. Nurses hustled through the revolving doors, clutching thermal mugs and murmuring greetings. Cars came and went along the curb, discharging tense parents, weary kids in wheelchairs, and the occasional therapist already running late. But one person wasn't moving. He sat just outside the main gate on a weathered plaid blanket folded over cracked asphalt, hunched beneath an old brown coat 2 sizes too large. One of his sneakers had duct tape wrapped across the sole, and his gloves had holes at the fingertips. A wool beanie, faded and lopsided, nearly covered his eyes as he bent over a notebook filled with pencil sketches. Not once did he look up, not when the security guard shuffled past, not when the ambulance lights blinked through the fog. He wasn't begging. He wasn't loitering. He was simply waiting. His name was Micah Jennings, and he was 10 years old. On the other side of the entrance, a gray pickup truck idled. Inside, Ethan Monroe sat silently, his eyes red from a sleepless night. His daughter Lena, just 7, dozed in the back seat, her legs tucked under a lavender blanket, head tilted against the window. Her dark curls framed a face too solemn for her age. There was something about hospital parking lots that aged people from the inside out, and Ethan had spent the last 3 months parked in one almost daily. Lena had been the kind of kid who climbed too high and ran too fast. A daredevil in sneakers, always the last to come inside for dinner, until the fall. It was only a few feet. Down from a playhouse her cousin dared her to jump off. The doctors said the damage to her spinal cord was incomplete but severe. She might recover, she might not. Today was their 5th physical therapy session. Lena had stopped asking questions after the 3rd one. Ethan had stopped answering. He got out and opened the back door. "Hey, sweetheart," he said gently. "Let's get you inside." Lena stirred. She didn't smile, didn't resist, just allowed herself to be lifted. Ethan cradled her with practiced care, as though any wrong move might shatter her. As he stepped toward the entrance, his boot thudded lightly against the edge of Micah's blanket. "Sir?" came a small voice. It wasn't loud, but it was certain. Ethan glanced sideways and almost kept walking, until the boy lifted his head and met his eyes. "I can help your daughter walk again." Ethan blinked. He looked around, confused, waiting for someone to laugh or follow up. But Micah wasn't smiling. There was no trace of mischief, no sarcasm, no con, just belief. "I'm sorry, what?" Ethan said slowly, tightening his arms around Lena. Micah stood, brushing the dirt from his sleeves. "I said, I can help her walk again." It was absurd. Ethan scoffed. "Kid, this isn't a game." "I'm not playing," Micah said calmly. "I've seen it work." Ethan took a step back, protective instinct rising. "Do you think this is funny? Do you have any idea what we've been through?" "I don't need to," Micah said, eyes steady. "I just need 1 hour." Ethan exhaled, his breath fogging between them. He studied the boy, the coat with the ripped seam, the taped-up shoe, the notebook still clutched in his hand. The kid looked like he hadn't had a proper meal in days, let alone a medical license. "You're what, 10? Almost 11. And you think you're some kind of miracle worker?" "No," Micah said, "but I learned from someone who was." Ethan bit his tongue. This was a waste of time. a distraction from the endless list of appointments and insurance calls and specialists who all said the same thing. Progress takes time. He turned and walked toward the sliding glass doors. But the words stayed. All through Lena's therapy session, where her muscles refused to respond and her face stayed blank, those words replayed like static in his brain. I can help your daughter walk again. It didn't sound like a pitch. It sounded like a promise. By the time they left the center, the morning fog had lifted and sunlight filtered through bare tree branches like a half-hearted apology. Ethan carried Lena back to the truck. Her head rested on his shoulder, eyes shut, lips parted slightly in exhaustion. He didn't see the boy until he was nearly at the curb. Micah hadn't moved. Same spot, same blanket, same expressionless face. But now, he was watching Ethan directly. Ethan stopped. You again? He muttered. Micah didn't respond. You know, Ethan said, I should report this. You're harassing people. I didn't follow you. You came back. Ethan frowned. He glanced down at Lena, whose eyes were now cracked open. You don't know her, Ethan said more softly. You don't know what she's lost. Micah nodded. I don't have to know. I just want to help. Ethan studied him again. There was nothing slick about this boy, nothing pushy, just quiet, unsettling confidence. He finally spoke. Why? Micah hesitated. Then, my mom used to help people walk again. She was a therapist. She taught me what to look for, how to feel for where the nerves are still trying. Ethan stared. Let me guess, you watched her a few times and now you think you're qualified? I carried her bag, Micah said softly. I watched her bring a man out of a chair after 5 years. She didn't use machines, just her hands, her voice, her patience. Something in that answer, something in the way the boy said her voice, chipped at Ethan's wall. He crossed his arms, unsure. I'm not giving you money, he warned. I didn't ask for it. Ethan stared a second longer, then looked at Lena. She was watching too, wide-eyed, silent. If I say no, Ethan said, you'll keep showing up, won't you? Micah didn't answer. Ethan sighed. Fine, Harrington Park, tomorrow, noon. You get 1 hour. Micah's mouth twitched, almost a smile. I'll be there. Ethan climbed into the truck and drove off. But in the rearview mirror, he saw the boy still standing, still watching, like someone who had just made a sacred pact. That evening, as Ethan tried to sort through Lena's prescriptions and the week's appointments, he barely registered the TV or the pasta boiling on the stove. Lena sat nearby, drawing slowly in a coloring book. Dad? She asked. Yeah? Who was that boy? Ethan glanced up. Just someone from outside the hospital. He said he could help. I know. Do you think he can? Ethan hesitated. I don't know, sweetie. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and tapped her fingers lightly along the armrest of her wheelchair, mimicking tiny footsteps. I hope he can. Ethan stared at her. It wasn't the words. It was the way she said them, with a softness he hadn't heard since the accident. Like the tiniest flame had been relit inside her. And, for the first time in months, Ethan didn't feel entirely numb. He felt afraid. Because hope was dangerous, and it had just shown up wearing duct-taped shoes and carrying a notebook. The next morning, the sun pushed through a pale winter sky, casting gold across the rooftops like it was trying too hard to make the world feel warm. Ethan had been up since dawn, pacing the kitchen, a mug of coffee gone cold in his hands. Lena was still asleep, curled on the couch with her legs tucked under that same lavender blanket, her doll nestled in the crook of her arm. He watched her for a long time, long enough to wonder if taking her to the park today was reckless. What was he thinking? Micah Jennings was just a kid who sat outside a hospital and talked like he'd inherited magic from his mother. And yet, that voice. Ethan couldn't shake it. The way he spoke wasn't childish, it was certain, like a boy who'd already lived through more than most adults ever would. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't a bad thing to give Lena something to look forward to. By 11:30, they were in the truck, parked just outside Harrington Park. The place wasn't much, an old patch of land wedged between a retired train track and a crumbling middle school. The grass was patchy, half dead. One basketball hoop still had a net, the other just a bent rim. A picnic bench leaned slightly to one side under a big oak tree whose roots had split the sidewalk. In short, it was the kind of place no one noticed, which made it perfect. Micah was already there. He sat cross-legged on a flat bench facing the big tree, a small gym bag at his feet. His coat was the same, the sleeves still too long, one cuff stained with old paint. A folded towel rested beside him like it belonged there. He looked up when he saw them, but didn't wave. Just nodded. Ethan parked and got out. He walked around to the passenger side, opened the door, and scooped Lena into his arms. "Ready?" he asked. She didn't answer, but there was something new in her face, a flicker of curiosity, maybe even anticipation. They approached quietly. Micah stood when they neared. "Hi again," he said, polite as always. Ethan nodded stiffly. "You came early." "I wanted to set up." Micah glanced down at Lena. "Hi, Lena." Her eyes widened. "How do you know my name?" "You said it yesterday," Micah replied. "I remember stuff." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "So, what exactly is this? Some kind of magic carpet ride?" Micah didn't react. "No, sir. Just the basics." He opened the gym bag and pulled out a few items. A pair of fuzzy socks, a tennis ball, a jar of cocoa butter, and a clear plastic container with something wrapped in a cloth, steam fogging the inside. Ethan frowned. "What is all that?" "My mom's tools," Micah said. "The rice is heated, helps loosen tight muscles. The ball is for pressure points." Lena watched closely as Micah laid everything out with care. "Is it okay if I work with her legs for a little while?" Micah asked. "Nothing will hurt. And if anything feels weird, just say stop, okay?" Lena looked to her father. Ethan sighed, then nodded. "Okay. Just be careful." Micah knelt beside her chair. He was gentle, cautious, like someone handling something precious. He unwrapped the blanket from her legs and placed the warm cloth over her thighs. Lena flinched. "Too hot?" he asked. She shook her head. "It feels good." He waited a few minutes, let the heat settle, then slowly began to move her legs. Small rotations, nothing forceful, side to side, up and down. Ethan watched closely, his arms crossed but his jaw unclenched. "You ever do this before?" Ethan asked, suspicious. Micah didn't look up. "My mom used to take me to shelters after school. She helped veterans, people who couldn't afford therapy." "And she taught you this stuff?" "She said everyone deserves to feel human again," Micah replied. "I used to carry her bag." He tapped Lena's knee lightly with a knuckle. "You feel that?" "No," she whispered. Micah nodded. "That's okay. I'll keep asking." He didn't stop talking as he worked, asked about her favorite colors, her favorite foods, what shows she liked to watch. At first, Lena answered in one-word replies, but then she started asking questions too. "Do you live around here?" "Kind of." "Do you go to school?" "I used to." "Why not anymore?" Micah hesitated. "My mom got sick. Then she passed." Lena looked down. "I'm sorry." "Thanks," Micah said, giving her a small smile. "Me too." Ethan didn't say anything, but he shifted slightly, his posture less rigid now. Something about the rhythm of the exchange, the way Micah treated his daughter not like a patient, but like a person, was starting to seep into his defenses. After about 30 minutes, Micah tapped her ankle. "You feel that?" Lena blinked. "A little, like pressure." Micah looked up at Ethan. "That's good." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "She sometimes says that during regular sessions." "Yeah," Micah said. "But those sessions are in a room full of machines. Sometimes kids tense up. They shut down. But here..." He gestured around the park, bare trees, open air, kids laughing on the basketball court nearby. It's different." Ethan didn't answer, but he was listening. Micah continued the gentle stretches, guiding Lena through small movements. He handed her the tennis ball and had her press it against her thigh, explaining how it helped awaken nerves. By the time they were done, Lena's cheeks were pink, not from cold, from effort. Micah stood and rolled the towel back into a neat square. "I'll show you more next week," he said. "It takes time. But your muscles?" He pointed to her thighs. "They still remember. You just have to remind them." Lena grinned, a real, honest grin. "Okay." Ethan cleared his throat. "We're not promising anything," he said quickly. "I'm not either," Micah replied. "I'm just trying." Ethan stared at him for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded bill, and held it out. Micah took a step back. "No, sir. I don't want your money." Ethan looked surprised. "Then why are you doing this?" Micah shrugged. "Because your daughter smiled." Ethan glanced at Lena, who was still smiling to herself, twirling the tennis ball between her fingers like it was something sacred. He didn't understand it. How a kid with nothing, no home, no parents, no reason, could give so much to a girl he didn't even know, but somehow he had. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan didn't feel like he was carrying all the weight alone. That night, after dinner, Ethan sat at his desk while Lena colored at the table nearby. She hadn't stopped humming for the past 20 minutes. He watched her for a moment, then turned back to his laptop. He opened a new tab. Typed, "Micah Jennings Birmingham." Nothing useful came up. A couple of old newsletters from local shelters. One mentioned a Monique Jennings, a community physical therapist who volunteered at veterans clinics. Another had a blurry picture of a boy holding a rice pack next to a wheelchair. No address, no school enrollment, no social worker. It was like the kid didn't exist, except he did. The next morning, as Ethan loaded Lena's backpack for school, she turned to him, eyes hopeful. "Are we going back Sunday?" "Yeah," he said, almost before thinking. "Yeah, we are." And somewhere deep inside him, beneath the ache, beneath the doubt, something stirred. It wasn't certainty, not yet, but it was enough to show up again. By the third Sunday, Harrington Park was beginning to feel familiar, not because it had changed. It was still the same uneven grass, the same rusty swings, the same broken bench, but because Ethan no longer saw it as a place to be avoided. Now, it felt like the only space where things moved forward. He and Lena arrived a little early that day. Ethan had packed snacks and a blanket, like they were going on a field trip. Lena had braided her own hair, or at least tried to. It was lopsided, a little messy, but she'd insisted on doing it herself. Micah was already there, sitting cross-legged on the bench beneath the oak tree, as always. But this time, there was something different in his posture, something calmer. He didn't rise immediately when he saw them, just gave a small wave, then continued carefully folding a warm cloth over a steaming bag of rice. "Morning," Ethan said as he wheeled Lena closer. Micah nodded. "Glad you came back." Ethan exhaled slowly. "So am I." They got right into it. Micah had added a few new tools to his little bag, a knotted resistance band, a small brush with soft bristles, and a roll of surgical tape. "What's all this for?" Ethan asked as he helped unwrap Lena's blanket. Micah explained in that same measured tone. "The band is for muscle engagement. The brush helps retrain skin sensitivity. The tape, it's just to guide movement." Ethan arched a brow. "You learn all this from your mom?" Micah hesitated, then nodded. "She used to take me with her after school, mostly to shelters, sometimes clinics. She said people needed more than therapy. They needed to feel seen." Lena's eyes were wide. "You helped her?" "I carried her bag," Micah said with a small smile. "Held people's hands sometimes. Mostly, I watched. She didn't use machines or big words. She just talked to them like they were worth something." Ethan looked down, suddenly unsure how to respond. "And after she passed?" he asked quietly. Micah's hands paused briefly before continuing to position Lena's leg. I stayed at a friend's place for a bit, then the shelter. I still go to the clinic sometimes. One of the nurses lets me read her old textbooks. You're telling me you learned how to do all this from watching and reading. And practicing, Micah added. On myself. On people who said yes, it's not magic. The body wants to heal. You just have to remind it. Ethan wasn't sure what stunned him more, the things the boy knew or the way he said them like it was the most natural thing in the world. Lena didn't seem to mind. She was fully focused, her eyes on Micah, her fingers clutching the armrest as he gently wrapped the band around her foot. Micah started guiding her through a set of small motions, just lifting the heel a fraction of an inch, holding, then lowering it again. He gave simple directions, never rushed her, never raised his voice. When her leg twitched unexpectedly, Micah just smiled and said, "That's the brain testing things." After 15 minutes, Micah tapped her knee again. "Feel that?" Lena paused, then gave the faintest nod. "Like a little buzz." Micah looked up. "Good. That's something." Ethan stood silently beside them, hands in his coat pockets. There was a strange ache in his chest, a mix of pride and something that felt dangerously close to hope. After another 20 minutes of slow, guided movement and soft encouragement, Micah finally sat back. "We're done for today." "That's it?" Lena asked, disappointed. "Your body's like a sponge," he explained. "It can only take so much before it stops soaking things in. Better to stop while you're still absorbing." Ethan crouched down to help her rewrap Lena's blanket, but she stopped him. "I want to do it." He paused, then let go. Micah stood and began to gather his things. Ethan watched him for a beat before speaking again. "You said you're at the shelter? Most nights? What about school?" Micah's hands stilled. "I dropped out after Mom got sick." "You're 10. Almost 11. That's not an answer." Micah sighed. "I tried, but I couldn't stay awake in class. Too many nights walking the streets or waiting outside the clinic. Eventually, they just stopped calling my name." Ethan felt a sharp pang in his chest. "What about family?" "No one local. My aunt's in Detroit. She offered to take me in after the funeral, but she didn't know my mom. She didn't get it." "Get what?" Micah looked up then, his eyes surprisingly steady. "That what my mom did mattered. That helping people wasn't just a job, it was a way to stay alive. I couldn't go live somewhere that made me forget that." Ethan was quiet for a long time. In the distance, someone's dog barked. A car passed on the far side of the park, but inside that moment, the silence was loud. Finally, Ethan nodded. "You ever think about going back? To school?" "Yeah." Micah shrugged. "Sometimes. But this?" He looked at Lena, who was now fiddling with the rice bag like it was a toy. "This feels right." That evening, Ethan found himself lying awake long after Lena had gone to bed. He stared at the ceiling, arms folded behind his head, his mind racing. Micah had never once asked for anything, not food, not praise, not even recognition. But the boy was giving them everything. His time, his care, his history. He thought of Micah leaving the park and walking back toward wherever he laid his head at night. A bench, a corner of a crowded shelter. It didn't sit right. The next day, Ethan found himself at the city library during lunch. He asked the front desk if there was a public database for social services. The clerk gave him a link and a knowing glance. He typed in Monique Jennings and found a few community records, volunteer service awards, donation acknowledgments, an obituary posted on a local outreach board. Then he typed Micah Jennings, a school record from 3 years ago, one disciplinary notice for being chronically absent, a health services waiver form. That was it. Micah really was a ghost in the system. Ethan closed the tab and leaned back, troubled. That weekend, when they returned to the park, he brought an extra folding chair and a thermos of hot chocolate. He didn't say anything about it, just handed it to Micah and set the chair beside him. Micah blinked, surprised. "Thank you." Ethan sat down beside him, nodding toward Lena, who was adjusting the towel over her lap. She was practicing all week, kept asking when Sunday would come. She's getting stronger, Micah said simply. You too, Ethan added. Micah gave him a puzzled look. Ethan sipped his coffee. You show up, every time, even when it's cold, even when you're hungry. That's strength, kid. Micah looked down, unsure what to say. You got somewhere warm to sleep tonight? Ethan asked. Micah didn't answer right away, then, sometimes. You ever think about staying with us? Just for a while. Micah froze. Like, in your house? Guest room's empty. You'd have your own bed, no strings. Micah's hands tightened around the thermos. You sure your neighbors wouldn't mind a kid like me? Ethan chuckled. After what you've done for my daughter, they better not say a word. Micah looked at him for a long moment, then looked away, nodding once. I'll think about it. They didn't talk about it again that day, but the next morning, at exactly 7:03 a.m., Ethan opened his front door to find Micah standing on the porch, backpack slung over one shoulder, rolled-up blanket tucked under his arm. You're early, Ethan said, wearing sweatpants and holding a coffee mug. Micah shrugged. Didn't want to be late. From behind him, Lena ran to the hallway squealing, Micah! The boy smiled for the first time in a while. Hey, superstar. Ethan stepped aside. Welcome home. As Micah walked in, he paused just long enough to take off his shoes. The duct tape on the right one was peeling. Ethan made a mental note to take him shopping. But for now, all that mattered was this. The boy who had been forgotten by the world had just stepped into a place where someone remembered. And, for the first time in years, Ethan's house didn't echo with silence. It breathed. The fourth Sunday began with wind and restless clouds. The sky hung low and heavy like it couldn't decide whether to cry or just brood. Harrington Park was nearly empty, save for a couple of kids kicking a flat soccer ball on the cracked asphalt. Micah arrived early as always, laying out the towel with a kind of reverence, setting the rice pack gently on top as steam curled up into the cold air. He was humming softly under his breath, the same lullaby his mother used to sing while working on patients, the kind with no real words, just sound and memory. He didn't need a watch to know what time it was, he always knew. At exactly noon, the Monroe truck pulled into the lot, but something felt different. Lena wasn't smiling this time. Her eyes were red, and she kept her face turned toward the window as Ethan parked. He stepped out with that same cautious expression he always wore when things felt like they might tip. He opened the back door and gently lifted Lena into her chair. She didn't speak, didn't meet anyone's eyes. Micah stood a few feet away, waiting. Ethan wheeled her forward, but his tone was clipped. She doesn't want to do it today, he said, voice flat. Micah looked at Lena. What happened? She folded her arms across her chest. I tried this morning. I tried to move my legs before I got out of bed. Nothing happened. Nothing's changed. Micah knelt beside her, but didn't reach for her legs. It takes time, Lena. We've only just started. She shook her head hard. I'm tired of trying. It's pointless. It's all fake. Ethan looked away, jaw tight. She's been frustrated all weekend. I'm not frustrated, she snapped. I'm done. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Even the wind paused. Micah stayed where he was, close enough to speak, far enough not to invade. You think I never get tired? He asked softly. She didn't respond. You think I didn't cry in a shelter when my mom couldn't afford her medicine and I had to sit there and watch her get sicker? Lena glanced at him then, just barely. I wanted to quit too, Micah said. I didn't want to carry her bag anymore, didn't want to watch people who never got better, but I kept going, because if I stopped, then the part of me that still believed would have stopped too. She looked down at her lap. Her fingers were twisted in her blanket. I don't want you to give up, Micah said, his voice a little steadier now, because I haven't. There was a long pause, and then, in the tiniest whisper, Lena said, I'm scared. Ethan turned his head sharply. That was the first time she had admitted it out loud. Micah leaned in a bit closer. I am too, he whispered. But scared doesn't mean stop. It just means you're close to something big. Lena blinked fast, then wiped her face with her sleeve. She didn't say anything else, but her hand slowly untwisted the blanket in her lap. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's try again." Micah nodded once and got to work. They didn't talk much during the session. This time it wasn't about distraction or filling silence with chatter. It was about presence, about patience, about breathing through the storm. Micah guided her gently, rotating her ankles, applying pressure to her calves, stretching one thigh at a time. He gave her fewer instructions and allowed her body to remember on its own. Her muscles tensed and released in small, shaky rhythms. Ethan knelt behind her, supporting her shoulders when needed, watching everything. He was quieter too, but something had shifted in him as well. The usual hesitation in his movements had faded, replaced with quiet intention. After 30 minutes, Lena let out a small grunt as her right foot pushed slightly against the ground. Micah's head shot up. "Do that again," he said. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. "Just try." She exhaled and focused. This time, the foot slid forward. Not much, maybe a few inches, but it moved. Not a twitch, a movement. Ethan blinked like he wasn't sure if he'd seen it correctly. "Was that? You did that," Micah said, smiling gently. Lena's mouth opened slightly. "I did? You really did." Ethan knelt beside her now, staring at her foot like it was a miracle. "I've never seen it move like that," he murmured. Lena turned to Micah. "You said it would happen." Micah tilted his head. "I said we'd try. You made it happen." That night, back at the house, the atmosphere was different. Dinner was still simple, grilled cheese and soup, but Lena chatted through most of it, even made a joke about Ethan burning the toast. Micah barely said a word, but his eyes were glowing. After they cleaned up, Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, watching as Micah quietly washed the dishes. "You ever think about going back to school?" he asked over his shoulder. Micah was drying a plate, his motions slow and precise. He glanced up. "Sometimes." "You're smart," Ethan said. "Smarter than most kids I know. You could go far." Micah paused, then nodded. "Maybe. I want to help people walk again, like my mom did." Ethan turned to face him fully. "Then let's figure out how to get you there." Micah gave the smallest smile, and for once it reached his eyes. They didn't say much more that night. They didn't need to. Later, after Ethan checked on Lena and found her asleep with the tennis ball clutched in her hand, he sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. The moon was full and bright, casting pale silver across the front yard. He thought about that moment in the park, how Lena's foot had moved, how she had admitted she was scared, how Micah had leaned in, not with the confidence of someone trying to prove something, but with the quiet certainty of someone who understood. He realized something then. The progress Lena was making wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual. It was the first time in months she'd let herself believe again, and Micah had given her that. Not as a doctor, not as a miracle worker, but as a boy who refused to give up. Inside the house, Micah was sketching quietly at the table, flipping through his mother's old notes, tracing the shapes of muscles and nerves like they were maps leading to lost treasure. In that moment, Ethan understood that whatever road lay ahead, they weren't walking it alone anymore. They were moving forward, inch by inch, step by step. And sometimes, that was everything. By the 5th Sunday, the park felt like something sacred. Not because anything had changed physically, it was still cracked pavement and lopsided benches, but because something was happening here that didn't fit into medical reports or treatment plans. Something was waking up, not just in Lena's legs, but in all of them. Ethan had begun to arrive earlier each time. He no longer lingered in the car, second-guessing himself. He brought a second blanket now, some extra gloves for Micah, and even made a stop at the corner bakery for hot rolls. Lena was the most eager of them all. She hummed during the ride, bouncing slightly in her seat as if her feet already knew they'd be doing more today than yesterday. Micah, as always, was waiting. He was sitting in his usual spot under the big oak tree, gym bag by his side, notebook open. But something was off. Ethan noticed it first. There was a bruise just under Micah's collarbone, faint but new, a reddish shadow that hadn't been there last week. His sleeve was torn at the cuff, and the way he moved, slower, more cautious, suggested soreness he wasn't admitting to. When Ethan got close, he crouched beside Micah and spoke in a low voice. "What happened?" Micah didn't look up. "Nothing." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "That nothing looks like someone's fist." Micah hesitated. "It was just a guy, at the shelter. I said something I shouldn't have." "Did he hit you?" Micah gave a small shrug. "He was drunk. He didn't mean it." Ethan sat back, biting down on the flood of things he wanted to say. "That doesn't make it okay." Micah finally looked at him. "I know, but where else am I going to go?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked over at Lena, who was already taking off her gloves and setting them neatly on her lap, ready for her session. Then he turned back to Micah. "You ever think about staying with us?" Micah blinked, stunned. "Like, for more than a few nights?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, for real." Micah's voice dropped. "I wouldn't be in the way? You'd have your own room. Clean sheets, a door you can lock, nobody drunk, nobody hitting." Micah looked down at his hands. "I don't want to be a problem." "You're not," Ethan said quietly. "You're a gift." Micah didn't respond right away, but Ethan could see something shifting in the boy's face, something long buried, maybe even forgotten, a flicker of what safety might look like, what belonging might feel like. "Okay," Micah said after a long pause. "I'll come." Ethan nodded once, then clapped a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Good." Their Sunday continued like usual. Micah guided Lena through stretches, this time with more involvement from Ethan. He showed the father how to help shift her weight gently, how to massage the pressure points behind her knees. Lena giggled when Ethan messed up a rotation and Micah corrected him with a grin. "This one," Micah said, holding up Lena's foot. "This muscle here, it's trying to remember." Lena beamed. "I feel it, kind of like a buzz in my toes." "That's your nerves knocking," Micah said. "They're saying, 'Let me back in.'" They worked for nearly an hour. Lena's movements were more deliberate now. Her foot dragged an inch without assistance, her toes twitched on command. And when Ethan helped her press her heel into the grass, she squealed. "I did it." "You did," Micah confirmed, nodding. "You really did." At the end of the session, Ethan packed up the supplies carefully, something Micah usually did himself. He folded the towel, zipped the gym bag, and handed Micah a sandwich he'd brought from home. Micah blinked. "Is this for me?" Ethan smirked. "Nah, it's for the squirrels." Micah laughed, a small, raspy sound that felt rare and golden. "Thanks," he said, tucking it into his bag. "Come by after dinner," Ethan said. "Lena'll want to show you her new drawings." Micah nodded. "Okay." That evening, just after sunset, Micah knocked gently on the front door. He had his backpack slung over one shoulder, a rolled-up blanket under his arm. He looked nervous, like he expected the offer to vanish once he crossed the threshold. But Ethan opened the door in sweatpants and a hoodie, holding a coffee mug. "Right on time," he said. Lena ran down the hall in her wheelchair, curls bouncing, face glowing. "Micah!" He grinned. "Hey, superstar!" Ethan stepped aside. "Welcome home." That night was quiet. No grand welcomes or big speeches. Just a warm meal, a clean bed, and space to breathe. Micah didn't say much, but the way he kept running his hand along the smooth desk in his room, the way he folded and unfolded his blanket 3 times before laying it down, it all said enough. He was trying to believe this was real. Over the next few days, Micah fell into a rhythm. He helped Ethan pack Lena's bag each morning, learned how to make toast without burning it, and took over dish duty after dinner without being asked. He never missed the morning stretch with Lena, even when he hadn't slept well. One afternoon, Ethan stood at the sink, drying dishes, and turned to Micah, who was sketching in his notebook at the kitchen table. "You ever miss being a regular kid?" Micah looked up. What's that even mean? You know, school, homework, friends, bikes, video games. Micah considered it. Sometimes. I liked school, when I could stay awake. You're sharp, Ethan said. You could do a lot. Ever think about going back? Micah shrugged. I guess, but I don't want to stop this. Helping people, it feels like what I'm supposed to do. Ethan nodded slowly. Then we'll figure out a way to do both. Micah smiled, barely, but it was the kind that stayed in his eyes. And then, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, while Ethan was on a work call, Lena's physical therapist called to follow up on a missed appointment. She asked if Lena was still participating in therapy. She is, Ethan said. Just differently now. When the therapist asked for clarification, Ethan hesitated. Then he told her about Micah. Not everything, just enough. Enough to make her pause. You're saying your daughter made progress because of a boy? Not just a boy, Ethan said. A healer. There was silence on the other end. Then a cautious, I'd like to observe sometime, if he's willing. Ethan relayed the message to Micah later that night. You okay with that? He asked. Micah shrugged. As long as it's not about me. What do you mean? I don't want this to become some show. It's about them, the kids. Ethan smiled. You sure you're not 35 in disguise? Micah snorted. Nah, 33 tops. The next Sunday, the therapist came quietly. She stayed on the sidelines, watching Lena go through her routine with Micah. She didn't interrupt. She just took notes. And when it was over, she approached slowly. You have a gift, she said. Micah shook his head. I just remember what it felt like to be helped. She smiled. Sometimes that's the only qualification that matters. Word started to spread. A parent from the neighborhood came by the following week with a daughter recovering from surgery. Then another family with a boy who walked with braces. By the end of the month, 5 families had shown up, some curious, some desperate, all of them carrying hope like a fragile glass in trembling hands. Micah didn't turn anyone away. He rearranged the towel, handed out rice packs, showed other parents how to mimic the gentle techniques his mother had taught him. He never promised results, never claimed to cure. He just showed up again and again and did the work. And the kids? They started to change. Tiny things at first. A twitch, a toe movement, a shift in balance. But they added up. They whispered of something stirring, something forgotten but not gone. Lena watched it all from her chair. She didn't complain when Micah gave his time to the other kids. She just smiled and watched and waited. One day, on the ride home, she looked up at Ethan in the rearview mirror and said, I like watching him help people. Ethan glanced back. Yeah? Yeah, she said. It makes me feel like I'm part of something good. And she was. So was Micah. So were they all. By the 6th Sunday, the park was no longer just a quiet patch of grass with a worn-out bench and a boy with duct-taped shoes. It had become a rhythm, a ritual, a place where strangers became something closer to community, bound not by where they came from, but what they were trying to overcome. That morning, Ethan noticed something different as they pulled into the lot. A small crowd had already formed near the oak tree. A few familiar faces, parents who had brought their kids the week before. A few new ones, standing awkwardly with folded chairs and coffee thermoses, scanning the space like they weren't sure they were in the right place. But Micah was there, same as always, laying out the towel, warming the rice packs, calm, unshaken. Lena leaned forward in her seat. There's more kids this time. Ethan nodded, not taking his eyes off the gathering. Looks like the word's getting out. When they parked and got out, a woman approached. One Ethan didn't recognize. Her daughter walked beside her with a soft brace on one knee. Excuse me, the woman said, hesitant. Is this where the boy works with the children? Micah turned, lifting his eyes from the towel. Hi, I'm Micah. The mother blinked. You're him? Micah offered a small smile. You're welcome to join us. Just give me a minute with Lena, and I'll be right with you." Ethan watched as the woman led her daughter to the edge of the grass, settling into a portable chair. "You okay with this?" Ethan asked, leaning down beside Micah. The boy nodded. "As long as it's still about the kids." "It is," Ethan said. "It always was." Micah didn't say anything else, just nodded and turned back to Lena. But later that day, something shifted. After the usual routine with Lena, more movement now, small leg lifts with less assistance, Micah began working with the new girl. Her name was Ellie, and she had a soft-spoken way about her that reminded Micah of his mother's patience. She didn't say much, but she didn't flinch either. When Micah asked if she felt anything in her toes, she nodded without hesitation. It was clear she believed him before he even proved himself. That was when the first parent spoke up, a father standing off to the side with his arms crossed. His son, a boy with cerebral palsy, sat nearby, legs in stiff braces, watching Micah with quiet fascination. "Excuse me," the father called out, voice firm. "Who are you?" Micah paused, hands gently holding Ellie's ankle. "I'm just helping," he said. "You a therapist? Licensed?" Ethan stepped forward. "Is there a problem?" The man ignored him. "Because my kid's been in therapy for 2 years and I've never seen someone like you at any clinic." Micah stood slowly. "I'm not a doctor. I never said I was." "Then what are you?" the man asked. "Because if you're pretending to be something you're not, that's not just dangerous, it's illegal." Silence fell like a dropped hammer. Parents glanced at each other. Some took a step back. The warmth that had been building all morning cooled in an instant. Ethan stepped in. "He's not pretending. He's helping. That's all." The man turned to him. "And who are you? His guardian? You okay with your daughter being a science experiment?" Micah's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He didn't argue. He just lowered his eyes and began packing up the supplies. Lena wheeled herself closer. "Hey," she said softly. "Are we done?" Micah didn't answer. Ethan reached for his shoulder. "Micah." But the boy shrugged him off. "It's fine." He didn't raise his voice, didn't defend himself. Just zipped his gym bag and stepped back like he was folding into himself. The crowd dispersed awkwardly. Some parents mumbled thank yous and promises to come back. Others left without a word. Ellie's mother gave Micah a long look, then said gently, "He helped her today. That's more than anyone else has done." But by then, Micah wasn't listening. He was already walking toward the street. Ethan caught up with him by the basketball court. "You don't have to leave." "I do," Micah said. "It's only a matter of time before someone really tries to shut this down." "That guy doesn't speak for everyone." Micah turned to face him. "But he said what they were all thinking." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but couldn't. Because Micah was right. The parents were grateful, but they were scared. Of hope. Of disappointment. Of trusting a boy with no degree and no last name. "That doesn't mean you stop," Ethan said finally. "You made Lena move her foot. You gave her that." Micah looked away. "Maybe that's all I was meant to do." Ethan shook his head. "No, that's just the beginning." That night, the house was quiet. Micah stayed in his room, the door half closed. Ethan stood outside for a few minutes before knocking. "Can I come in?" Micah nodded from the desk. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed. "You remember what you said to Lena when she wanted to give up?" Micah didn't answer. "You told her scared doesn't mean stop. It means you're close to something big." Micah's fingers tightened around his pencil. "I'm just a kid, Ethan. No one's going to let me keep doing this forever." "You're not just anything," Ethan said. "You're the reason people started believing again." Micah looked up then, eyes rimmed red but steady. "Then help me keep going." Ethan smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The next morning he made a call to Lena's therapist, the one who had observed last week. Then to the woman at the community clinic who had known Micah's mother. By the end of the day, he'd secured 3 letters of support and a meeting with a nonprofit director who specialized in youth rehabilitation projects. "Let them come at us," Ethan said later. "We'll be ready." By the following Sunday, Micah stood under the oak tree again, But this time he wasn't alone. A volunteer from the community center brought folding mats. A local cafe dropped off coffee and muffins, and Lena's therapist returned with a clipboard and a smile. "I brought someone," she said. "A physical therapy professor from the university. He wants to see what you do." Micah swallowed hard. "He knows I'm not licensed?" "He knows," she said, "and he wants to learn." Micah glanced at Ethan. "You good?" Ethan asked. Micah took a deep breath. "Let's try again." The park filled up faster than usual. 11 families showed up, some early, some with skeptical eyes. But Micah greeted each child like they were old friends. He listened to parents. He asked gentle questions. He never overpromised. He just showed up. Lena watched from her chair with her hands folded in her lap. She didn't ask for attention. She didn't complain. She just observed, calm, patient, proud. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Micah sat back on his bench, watching 2 kids take turns pushing each other in a wheelchair, laughing so loudly it echoed across the court. Ethan sat beside him. "You okay?" Micah nodded. "Yeah, I am." "You know," Ethan said, "I used to think I was the only one carrying this." Micah looked at him. "Now, I know I wasn't carrying it at all," Ethan added. "You were." Micah smiled softly, then turned to watch Lena play catch with Ellie using a foam ball someone had brought. "You think they'll remember this?" he asked. Ethan followed his gaze. "I think they'll remember you." Micah didn't answer. He didn't need to. The boy who had once waited outside a hospital with nothing but a notebook and belief was now the center of something bigger than he ever imagined. And he had no plans to stop. By the 7th Sunday, the rhythm had become something deeper, a pulse that connected them all. What started as quiet moments between a boy, a girl, and a park bench had grown into a movement stitched together by small victories, shared vulnerability, and unwavering consistency. Micah was no longer just the kid who helped Lena. He had become something of a legend, soft-spoken, serious, and steady. A whisper of hope passed from one family to the next. That morning, the sun cut through the trees in long golden threads, painting the grass with light. Micah arrived early, as always. He carried his usual gym bag, but now with an extra mat and a pair of donated braces for one of the new kids. Someone had given him a second towel, and he laid both out like ceremonial cloths. Everything he did had purpose. Everything had care. When Ethan and Lena pulled up, they saw the difference before the engine even shut off. There were more people, more kids, parents setting up foldable chairs, volunteers from the local high school handing out bottled water. A pastor from the neighborhood church had brought a speaker playing soft music. The park buzzed, not with noise, but with life. A new kind of hope. Micah gave Lena a quick wave. "Hey, superstar!" She waved back. "Ready to work?" Ethan smiled. "That's the spirit." They went through the routine. Warm cloths, leg stretches, simple commands. Lena was faster now. Her knees bent with more control, her toes wiggled with intent. But today, Micah had something new. "Okay," he said, reaching into his bag. "Let's try something different." He pulled out a wide cloth belt, looping it gently under Lena's knees and handing the ends to Ethan. "What's this?" Ethan asked. "We're going to help her lift both knees," Micah explained. "Just a little. We guide, but she controls." Ethan hesitated. "You sure?" Micah looked at Lena. "She's ready." They gave her a few seconds. Micah knelt beside her, one hand on each shin, his voice low and calm. "Take a breath. When you're ready, pull your knees up." Lena shut her eyes, her brow furrowed. Then, slowly, shakily, both knees lifted, barely an inch off the mat, but they lifted. Ethan blinked. "You did that?" Lena opened her eyes. "I did it." Micah grinned. "See? The body remembers." Ethan looked at her, then at Micah. "You're something else, kid." Micah just nodded and started preparing the next exercise, like it was just another day. But it wasn't. That evening, after everyone had gone home and Lena had fallen asleep, Ethan sat across from Micah at the kitchen table. The boy was sketching again. New diagrams, notes in the margins. Ethan leaned in. "Where do you go after all this?" Micah didn't look up. "What do you mean?" "I mean, after the park, after here, what's next?" Micah paused. "I don't know. I haven't thought that far." "You ever think about making this official?" "Official how?" "Training, school, something permanent, a future." Micah set his pencil down. "You think someone like me gets that?" Ethan's voice lowered. "I think you already earned it." Micah looked down at his hands. "I don't know where to start." Ethan leaned back, nodding. "We'll figure it out. Together." There was a long pause. Then Micah said quietly, "I've never stayed in one place this long." Ethan smiled. "Get used to it." Over the next week, Ethan made calls. He reached out to a local therapist who had connections with a community college. A physical therapy professor offered to meet Micah for an informal session, just to talk, to see where his knowledge could take him. And then, almost by accident, the biggest moment came. A friend of Ethan's, who worked for a nonprofit, mentioned they had funding available for youth-led health initiatives. When she heard about Micah, she asked to visit the park. She came the next Sunday, clipboard in hand, quiet but attentive. She stayed the whole session. Watched Micah guide not just Lena, but 3 other kids, one recovering from a stroke, another with early muscular dystrophy, and a little boy who had never spoken more than 2 words until Micah got him to laugh. Afterward, she approached him gently. "How would you feel about some help?" Micah looked confused. "Help?" "Resources, equipment, maybe even some tutoring. If you want to keep doing this, we'd like to support you." Micah blinked, unsure. "You mean, for free?" "For people like you," she said, "there should never be a price." He nodded slowly, speechless. That afternoon, as the last car pulled away, Micah sat on the bench and watched the empty field, his eyes softer than usual. Ethan joined him, handing over a bottle of water. "You did good today." Micah took a sip. "Feels like more than just one Sunday now." "It is." "You think my mom would be proud?" Ethan didn't even hesitate. "She already is." Micah closed his eyes and tilted his head back. "Sometimes I still hear her, like when I'm helping someone stretch or when a kid says something silly, like she's laughing right behind me." Ethan was quiet. "Maybe she is." Micah opened his eyes. "You think that's crazy?" Ethan shook his head. "I think it's real." Later that night, as Micah was organizing his notebook at the desk in his room, he found something tucked between 2 pages, an old photograph of his mother. She was kneeling beside a veteran in a wheelchair, both of them laughing, the sun catching in her hair. Micah touched the corner of the photo like it was fragile glass. He whispered, "We're still helping, Mom, just like you said." The next Sunday came faster than expected. This time, Ethan brought an extra mat and a fold-out chair. He didn't say anything about it, just placed them beside Micah's bag. As Micah knelt to warm the rice packs, Ethan crouched beside him. "You ever get tired of this?" Micah thought for a moment. "Sometimes, but not tired like I want to stop. More like tired because it matters." Ethan nodded. "That's the good kind of tired." Lena arrived a few minutes later, bouncing slightly in her chair. "What are we doing today?" Micah smiled. "Standing." Her eyes widened. "Really? If you're ready." She nodded, serious now. "I am." They laid out the towel, positioned the supports, and walked her through the prep. When everything was in place, Micah gave her a look. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to try." She gripped the arms of her chair. Ethan moved behind her, hands under her arms. Micah steadied her knees. "On 3, Micah said softly. 1, 2, 3. Ethan lifted gently, and Lena stood. For the first time she stood. Her legs trembled. Her hands shook. But she was upright, not just leaning, standing. A hush fell across the park. Then someone gasped. Another clapped a hand over their mouth. A few parents reached for phones, but no one moved. Lena opened her eyes slowly. I'm standing. Micah blinked hard, something catching in his throat. Yeah, you are. Ethan froze, breath stuck in his chest. He released his hand slightly. She stayed up. She's doing it, he whispered. She's doing it on her own. Lena took one shaky step, then another, and then, because she was 7 and brave and didn't know how to be afraid, she took a third before tumbling into Ethan's arms. He caught her, laughing, crying, shaking. You did it. You really did it. She turned to Micah, tears in her eyes. You said I would. Micah smiled. I said we'd try. That evening, the park didn't empty right away. Families stayed, talked, hugged. Some prayed. The sun dipped low and golden, and it felt, for a moment, like they were standing in the center of something holy. Micah sat quietly on the bench, watching it all unfold. He didn't speak. He didn't need to, because sometimes the loudest things in the world are the ones we never have to say out loud. By the 8th Sunday, Harrington Park had transformed. It wasn't just the number of people, it was the way they showed up. The way they brought folding chairs and thermoses not for themselves, but for someone else. The way the grass, once trampled and lifeless, now bore footprints of joy and effort and community. There were signs now, hand-painted by local kids staked into the ground, movement class, free every Sunday, and beneath it, in smaller letters, no one turned away. Micah never asked for recognition, but people knew. They arrived early to greet him, not out of obligation but with something close to reverence. Some offered extra rice packs, others brought homemade muscle rubs, and a nearby diner started delivering bagels and coffee in bulk. The families who returned week after week began to help each other, guiding their children through stretches, passing down what Micah taught. He still used the same worn towel, still wore the duct-taped sneakers. But the space around him had expanded. What used to be one square of cloth on the ground had become a field of possibility. And yet, that morning, something felt different. The air was warm, softer than usual. The trees swayed gently, as if moving in rhythm with the breath of the park itself. Even Lena was quieter on the ride over, eyes focused out the window, her hands folded in her lap. Ethan noticed it too. You okay? Lena nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm just thinking. About what? She didn't answer right away. Then, about standing, about today. When they arrived, a small crowd was already gathered near the oak tree. Some children played quietly. Others sat with their parents, eyes scanning for Micah. He was there, of course, setting up like always, towel stretched flat, supplies in their place, water bottle beside him. But when Lena rolled up beside him, he paused, just for a moment. Then he looked her in the eyes. You ready? She nodded. No smile, just quiet determination. Ethan wheeled her into position at the center of the mat. Micah knelt beside her, his voice lower than usual, more serious. Same as before, he said. We help you stand. You do the rest. Ethan moved behind her, hands sliding gently under her arms. Micah steadied her knees, placing her feet carefully on the mat. "'Kay," Micah whispered. "On 3. Lena closed her eyes. 1, 2, 3. Ethan lifted, Micah guided, and Lena stood. Her legs trembled, her arms shook, but she was up. Her own strength, her own focus. The crowd held its breath. Lena opened her eyes slowly and whispered, "I'm standing." Micah blinked hard. "Yeah, you are." Ethan stood frozen, still holding her but not supporting her. She was balancing, on her own, and then, slowly, shakily, she took a step. Then another, and, because she was 7 and filled with quiet fire, she took a third. She stumbled, of course, fell right into her father's arms. But he caught her, laughing and crying and holding her so tightly it looked like he might never let go. "You did it," he whispered. "You really did it." Lena turned to Micah. You said I could. Micah gave a crooked smile. I said we'd try. That afternoon, no one left the park in a hurry. People stayed. They hugged, talked, sat cross-legged on the grass like it was sacred ground. Some shared their stories. Some cried. Some just watched their children laugh and move like nothing had ever been broken. Micah sat quietly on the bench beneath the oak tree, notebook in his lap, legs crossed. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. Later that night, the house was quiet. Lena had fallen asleep almost instantly, arms wrapped around her stuffed rabbit, legs stretched gently under the covers. Ethan stood in the kitchen, washing dishes with the lights dimmed. Micah was at the table, pouring cereal into a bowl, flipping through his sketchbook. You know, Ethan said, not looking up from the sink, you changed everything. Micah didn't respond right away. I did? Ethan turned, drying his hands. He walked over, rested one hand gently on Micah's shoulder. My daughter walked today, not because of a hospital, not because of a machine, but because a kid with nothing showed up, again and again, even when nobody asked him to. Micah looked down. That's what my mom would have done. Ethan's throat tightened. I wish she could have seen this. Micah's voice dropped to a whisper. She did. I think she sees everything. They stood in silence for a while, just breathing. Then Ethan spoke again. You ever think about how many lives you're going to change? Micah looked up. I already am. He wasn't being arrogant. He wasn't boasting. He was stating a fact, a quiet truth. In the days that followed, the story of the park reached further than they'd imagined. A nurse from Graceview Hospital had been walking her dog near the swings and paused when she saw Lena on her feet, giggling as she tossed a ball to another girl. She hadn't seen Lena outside her wheelchair in months. She didn't interrupt, just stood there, watching, tears silently tracing her cheeks. When she got home, she told her sister, who worked in patient services. By midweek, word had spread across 3 departments. Is it true? A therapist asked Ethan during a call. Lena's walking? 3 steps, Ethan said, and counting. Because of him? Ethan smiled. Because of all of us, but yeah, especially him. And the following Sunday, 2 more families arrived. One with a boy who used a walker, another with a girl recovering from spinal surgery. Both parents said the same thing. We heard about the kid in the park. Micah looked at Ethan as they approached. You don't have to, Ethan said quietly. You can say no. Micah adjusted the strap on his bag. I want to. And so he did. He gave up his session with Lena that day to work with the new children, showed their parents how to use the towel, how to warm the rice packs just right, how to encourage without pushing too hard. He didn't talk at the kids. He spoke to them, eye to eye, like they mattered. You're not broken, he told a boy with braces. You're just learning a different way to be strong. Lena watched everything from her chair, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't interrupt. She didn't pout. She just observed. Later that afternoon, in the truck on the way home, she said softly, I like watching him help people. Ethan glanced at her in the mirror. Yeah? Yeah, she said. It makes me feel like I'm part of something good. He smiled. You are. The next weekend, 5 more families showed up. The one after that, nearly a dozen. A pastor brought extra chairs. The diner added breakfast sandwiches to their weekly delivery. Someone started printing flyers. Free movement classes, Sundays at noon. Harrington Park. No mention of Micah's name, by his request, but everyone knew who started it. A local reporter arrived one morning with a notepad and a camera. Ethan pulled Micah aside. You okay with this? Micah looked around, at the parents holding hands, at the kids attempting toe lifts, at Lena laughing with Ellie on the bench. He nodded. As long as it's not about me, it's about them. The article ran on page 2 of the Birmingham Sunday Post. The headline read, 9-year-old with a gift helps dozens heal in a city park. They didn't publish his full name, but word got out anyway. A doctor from a private clinic offered to mentor him. A nonprofit reached out to fund therapy supplies and educational resources. A retired tutor volunteered weekly sessions to help Micah catch up on math. For the first time since his mother passed, people didn't just look at Micah. They saw him. But Micah never changed. Not really. He still used the same towel, still folded the rice packs just right, still checked on Lena first every week before helping anyone else. But now, the park that once echoed with stillness and sore bodies pulsed with something new. Movement. Belief. And at the center of it all stood a boy with taped-up shoes, an old notebook, and the kind of heart you couldn't teach. A boy who had no home, until he built one in the open air, stitched together by the people he refused to give up on. 9 Sundays, 9 days of shared breath, held hope and quiet courage. And still, it was just the beginning. Sometimes, the people who have the least to give end up giving the most. Micah had no formal training, no money, no title. What he had was heart, consistency, and the memory of a mother who believed that healing didn't always come from machines. It came from presence, from care, from believing in people when they couldn't believe in themselves. Through nothing but small actions repeated over time, he changed not just Lena's life, but the lives of dozens of families who had almost given up hope. The most powerful lesson from Micah's story isn't about miracles. It's about showing up, again and again. It's about how courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a quiet voice that kneels beside a child and says, "Let's try." It's about the kind of leadership that doesn't demand attention, but earns trust through action. In a world where credentials and appearances are often valued above compassion and effort, Micah reminds us that you don't need a title to change a life. You just need to care enough to stay. So if you've ever felt small, invisible, or like you have nothing to offer, remember this: the world doesn't need perfection. It needs people who refuse to walk away. Where are you watching from? We'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that restore faith in humanity and remind us all of what really matters.